just how frustrating are the Toronto Blue Jays these days? When you think about it, they win. They shouldn't be pressed by the Colorado Rockies. They shouldn't be pressed by the Oakland A's, but they are.
Well, John, it's a really interesting question, and I've got a couple of thoughts on the Jays. Number one, they should not be in the position they are in now. They should have banked many more wins in the first 5 months of the season, such that they're not desperate to find ways to win games in the early days of September to make sure that they just get into the playoffs. This is a team that we thought was going to be, and who knows, might still be, a World Series contender, but they have not quite played at that level during the course of the season. Now, all of that being said, in a time of year when you need to win games, you need to certainly dominate series and ideally sweep them. However it looked, they did take 2 of 3 against Colorado. They did win a very nervy game against Oakland. Extra innings were required to do it on Monday. So you've taken 3 out of 4 to begin this road trip, and you've done it with really having to rely on a lot of younger players because of injury, whether it's Davis Schneider, Spencer Horwitz has been really important. They've had to have Biggio now playing on an everyday basis. Espinal was the hero late in the game yesterday. They now, of course, with Jansen out, they have to rely on Heineman in addition to Kirk. So it's a different cast, no doubt about it. But I think that this team has shown some character, and maybe with the bats getting well at Coors Field, which tends to happen when you play in Colorado, that might be something that carries on with some renewed confidence heading into what I believe is going to be the series that decides it all, which is 1 week from right now against the Texas Rangers at home.
Is this team rewriting their DNA in a way, like becoming a scrappy team instead of Bo and Vladdy?
Darren, it's a great question, and I think that's what's happening. It's happening out of necessity. It's happening on the fly. Vladdy still is a threat, and he's had some good at-bats. But I think this team is realizing they're going to have to win games, Darren, with a collective effort and deep, thorough at-bats. Biggio is not going to be someone that can produce in the way that Bo did and can. But Cavan does work a professional at-bat. He does see a lot of pitches. So it's a different kind of approach. And I think when you consider the way that he has played and the way that Schneider has played, the way Horwitz is playing right now, Varsho has been certainly a little bit better of late too. There is a different acknowledgement that they're going to need to have a diversity of offensive approach as opposed to just waiting around for Vladdy to save them with an MVP type season. I think any of us that have watched this team play over the 5+ months of the regular season, we realize that Vladdy is just not having an MVP type season. It's not happening this year. He can still be a very good hitter, but he's not the player he was a couple of years ago. And so I do think that there's an acknowledgement, maybe it's by John Schneider, maybe it's by the hitting coaches overall. Hey, we've got to take a different approach. And it seems to me that the overall offense is understanding this, internalizing it. When they get Belt back, I think he's been a really important player. Of course, he missed some time recently with the stomach virus, but there's a belief that Belt is someone that's going to have a tremendous impact down the stretch. And this is not going to be a team, Darren, that superstars their way to probably a division title or anything beyond that. They're going to have to grind. John Schneider has said that, and at least through the first 4 games of this road trip, I think we're actually seeing it demonstrated pretty well.
Don't forget Ernie Clement. He's been a pretty good source of both sides of the ball, offense and defense. But on the topic of Guerrero, and just in listening to people and reading about it, I have never seen more criticism of Guerrero in his time in Toronto than right now. And I'm not sure whether it's disappointment or just critical thinking, because he hasn't been able to reach those key moments and hit that key ball very often this year, and that has to be frustrating for the team and for him.
You're right, John, because it's a difficult conversation to broach when you've got a hitter who's that talented to then explain to him, okay, we have to make an adjustment to your hitting. Well, he's been a hitting genius since he was in the cradle, basically because of his father and growing up around the game. So I think it's a challenge, really, John and Darren, to be able to approach a hitter of his caliber and offer a very constructive and detailed critique of what he can do differently. I think he knows what he's supposed to do more, which is elevate the ball, catch it out front, hit more line drives, fewer easy rollover ground balls to the infield. He knows all of that. So it's not as though the information is novel that's coming into him. It just seems that for whatever reason, his timing, the exit velocity, the launch angle, whatever you want to call it, by any metric, it just hasn't been there. And I think that part of it is, John, that Jays fans realize correctly that an MVP type season from him is probably the difference between having to fight for your playoff life right now and being in there comfortably by several games. That to me is apparent. I mean, he represents that difference, that delta between where they are now and where they could be. I think it's also amplified because he is in so many ways, to a Blue Jays fan, one of their own. You think about of course, he was born in Montreal. We've all watched him grow up. And so I think there's that connection in a visceral way to him that is not there with a lot of other players. And so you feel as though he's your own guy. And so you're almost expecting more of him. He wants to succeed. Clearly, we can tell how badly he wants it. But this is one of these sports where trying harder or working on more adjustments or thinking more about it is not always to your benefit. And it comes at you every single day. He does play with a very good consistency in terms of his availability. And when you're in there every day, mentally, you don't have that space to sit back and reflect and make an adjustment. So I don't know that it's going to get better. I also don't know what the heck is going to happen this offseason, whether it's you consider trading him, you consider what a longer-term extension would look like. I happen to think that it's really difficult to sign him to an extension now because his value is down. So his agents are not going to want to make a deal based on a down year. And the Jays, candidly, what's the argument exactly to sign someone to a massive deal when they've produced at a league average level this year? It's a complicated, nuanced, frustrating situation. And all that being said, if something clicks, and it can, he could have a monster final month of the season and help this team get into October and beyond. That's the magic of baseball, and how when you've got a really talented player, more often than not, it's always a good bet to bet on supreme talent, which I think Vlad still has.
We're so uber focused on the here and the now with Vladdy and what happened this season, but how far off realistically is he from a Vladdy year? Are we 10%? Are we 20% off of what he could be?
That's a great question, Darren. I think that from a typical Vladdy year, we're probably about 20% off. From the MVP candidate year, it's probably more like 30 or 35% off.
It's a lot
in terms of value. Yeah, it's big, because if you look at, and we've been tracking this at different times during the course of the year, Darren, where you look at, and wins above replacement is not always the best metric to go to, but it is helpful just to give you a gauge of the overall, the base running, the defense, the offense. And he's pretty consistently, if you look at fangraphs.com, he's been average this year. He has been an average player when you include everything in there. And that's why, even if you look at the offensive numbers and it says, well, he's above average, and he may well be above average, but at first base, you're supposed to be above average. So above league average, broadly speaking, if you lump in all the outfielders and shortstops and second basemen and catchers offensively, yeah, I mean, if you look at the whole league, he's still, by that measure, above the league average. But for first baseman, he is almost in the exact center of the sport. He's been behind guys like Ryan Noda of the Athletics, Lamont Wade Jr. of the Giants, guys that are not household names in the sport. But this is one of those positions where, because of the defensive profile of a first baseman, you're supposed to be able to find someone who can play a passable first base and get on base and hit for some occasional power. You're supposed to be able to find guys like that. Whereas what Bo Bichette does is more unique, because there's a defensive component at a premium position. And I think that's where it's going to be really challenging for Vlad to say, I deserve an extension of X amount of dollars for the long term, because a front office would say, well, wait a minute. If your name wasn't one that our fans were so connected to, we'd look around and say, you know, how different is your year now from what we were seeing from Lyle Overbay on a year-over-year basis 15 years ago? And the answer is,
holy smokes, bring out
probably
the Lyle
not that
Overbay
different.
reference.
And Lyle, by the way, Lyle had a really good career, but that's the point. Lyle was a good league average first baseman, and that's what Vlad is right now.